Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 12th public lecture hosted by NUS Cities. Through the lecture series, we hope to create a platform for discussion, introspection, and conversation to give momentum to the ongoing research and exploration regarding issues concerning cities. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for the evening. Professor Tony Wong is the Professor of Sustainable Development at Monash University, Fellow of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering, and the 2018 IWA Global Water Laureate. With over 30 years professional experience, he is internationally recognized for his research and practice in sustainable urban water management, particularly water-sensitive urban design. His expertise has been gained through national and international consulting, research, and academia partnerships. He has led a large number of award-winning urban design projects in Australia and overseas, based around the biomimicry adaptation of nature-based solutions for water. He was presented by the Institute of Engineers Australia the John Holland Award as Civil Engineer of the Year in 2010 and was commended for having defined a new paradigm for design of urban environments that blend creativity with technical and scientific rigor. Professor Wong provides strategic advice to governments and industry on urban water management nationally as well as internationally. He is on the Asian Development Bank panel of specialists advising on projects, mainstreaming water resilience in Asia and the Pacific. He previously served on the Australian Prime Minister's Science, Engineering and Innovation Council's working group on water for cities in 2006 and 2007 at the height of the country's millennium drought. He was formerly the chief executive for the Cooperative Research Centre, otherwise known as CRC, for water-sensitive cities in Australia, which was an Australian government initiative to help transform Australian and global cities into more sustainable, resilient, and livable cities through innovative urban water management and integration with urban spatial planning and landscape design. Please join me in welcoming him.
Hello, good afternoon. I thought that was my job to introduce it. That's why I was sitting there. Never mind, I will actually say a few words which is not in the CV. I think that's more interesting for you. First of all, Tony is not new to Singapore. Okay, she's been very actively involved in many of our projects. I think it was actually during the time when Professor Khoo Ting Chai was the CEO of PUB from 2003 to 2011 or something like that. I think he actually brought Tony in to convince his colleagues, which he had a lot of problems with, about the ABC waters. So, and that's how the ABC waters started, with a lot of Tony's input and help, persuading the PUB there's another way of doing waterways besides the straight canals and so on. So, and this ABC was completed and was done between 2009, 2011, and actually that becomes the story of Singapore, how we can integrate drainage, water, urban catchment together with land use. The second thing, of course, is since then he's been quite involved with PUB activities, also with SIWW. Not many of you will know that he actually helped to curate a lot of the events and the sessions in the Singapore IW, which is the Singapore International Water Week, which is due in, not the next one actually in June. So on top of that, he actually is a visiting professor to NUS Cities. And a few of the things that we wanted him to share with us is, again, how does he always have been able to successfully integrate his urban water management together with urban design within the cities, and how do you look beyond just the simple thing of water management. This applies very much to Singapore locality, where land is actually very tight. We need to see multiple use of both drainage and other use. And that was the reason why he's actually here. And then there's a fun fact, which actually I just got from him this morning. He de-stressed by doing ironing clothes. So not many of you, I know many of us, including myself, never like ironing, but he has a habit of de-stressing by ironing. So that's just a fun fact. So without further ado, I'll let Tony talk about the transformative cities on the role of contemporary urban water management. So over to you, Iron Man.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. First of all, I'm delighted to be here again. It's my connection with Singapore, of course, goes back a very long time. By way of background, of course, I was born in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. And of course, my connection with Singapore at that time was to come and visit Singapore. And I remember the times when my parents would come and we would go and visit, I think, Hapa Villa, is it? Hapa Villa has always been a treat. But my sort of professional association with Singapore really started, as mentioned, in 2003. That is 20 years ago. I didn't think I was a young man then, but in 2003 when Khoo Ting Chai led a delegation of Singaporeans out to Melbourne to have a look at what we were doing then, and that was around the time when I was well into my research career at Monash University. It was also around the time whereby Melbourne in Australia was facing a real threat to significant algal bloom in its water body, and that in addition to managing its sewage discharge to it, there was a clear realization that with any urban setting, you find that every time it rains, what the rain does is actually cleanse the city and wash all the pollution from the city into the bay. And we were developing concepts of how it was an opportunity to start to introduce what we now refer to as nature-based solutions. But you got to remember in 2003, there were no such concepts. In 2003, I was already involved in working in partnership with an ecologist, which also at that time in 2003 was quite an anomaly that how dare engineers work with ecologists. Yeah. But it was that collaboration that got us to think about how we could understand natural processes down to the biochemical level and how water movements, distribution, velocities, laminar layer, turbulent flow, how they actually can influence how those natural processes can actually help to deliver ecosystem services, such as cleansing of water. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I was just amazed when I looked at my notes that it was 20 years ago when Khoo Ting Chai came out and I met him for the first time, and in his typical enthusiastic self, which hasn't changed, he said, "You've got to come to Singapore." And that was the beginning of my journey to Singapore. Anyway, that's just a bit of an introduction. My talk today is really to acknowledge to some degree the type of significant advancement that I see in Singapore every time I come. But at the same time, want to challenge you to think about what else in the horizon and how do you harness the talent and the skills and the examples that you have here for the region. And that's how I want to challenge you on that. So on that note, I might commence my presentation. Okay. I'll start with just this. 2015, for me as an optimist, was a very significant year. And I hope it would be for you too, because in 2015, I certainly sense a lot of optimism in the world and what happened in 2015. It was the realization that perhaps we can actually start to be a little bit more serious about our climate actions and our initiative for Agenda 2030. Because in 2015 was when the United Nations got together a whole bunch of people, whole bunch of countries to agree on a single blueprint on fostering global sustainability, equity, and to some degree, in developing the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, it implicitly signaled the importance of understanding the interconnections between all of those elements that makes the world sustainable to promote peace, to reduce inequity, and so on and so forth. That whilst it is important for us to think about individual goals, as they were presented, it became really clear about the importance of understanding the interconnection between environmental issues, social issues, economic issues. But what was encouraging for me in September in 2015 was the fact that both the developed world and the developing world are now together in actually defining their sustainable development goals against this 17. That each country were to actually understand what is it that they can do to achieve those targets. And it sends another signal. The signal that there is no one single set of guidance or targets for countries, that each country need to understand their context and their situation in developing their own sustainable development goals. So for me, it was when I started in academia in the early 1990s, it was a period of us doing a lot of work and the frustration that there was not a lot of action happening globally. So it was great, a great period in 2015 to see this realized. Great excitement amongst all of us. 2015 also signaled another significant event. That was the Paris Agreement. In December 2015, the world managed to come together and agree that we all should work together to try and reduce the impact of climate change. They're trying to reduce global temperature or reduce the rate of increase in global temperature. Again, a significant event of how nations need to come together to address some of these global challenges. And I've just picked these two. Of course, they are the greatest challenge of our time. That was 2015. 2023, last year, how are we traveling? Really good question. At the United Nations Conference on SDG in September, there was a real sense of panic that we are nowhere near our ambitions and our goals. In fact, when the Secretary General talked about the need for a global rescue plan, and then make mention that all nations, including Singapore, are falling short of their SDG targets, progressing on some, and either moving too slowly or regressing below the baseline level set in 2015. Right? There was a call to action about accelerating our SDGs now that we are past our halfway point. So that happened in 9th September, and I was very fortunate to be part of the early discussions about the type of solutions that need to be promoted. And what I found when I was actually in New York in a pre-event prior to this, where all the ministers are out there saying what they want to say, but in a pre-event, which was in June in New York, one of the things that I realized is that there are no shortage of ambition. Every country wants to say this. It's like world peace. Everybody wants world peace. And the biggest problem was an inability to operationalize policies. And that the minute we get down to context, there was this inability to do that. And really, the inability is because we often use examples and case studies, but we do not have the capacity to actually understand the underpinning behind those examples, and therefore are unable to adapt those knowledge to different contexts, different countries. And I recognize that that is the real challenge in all of this. It's not a shortage of commitments, rhetorics, and in some cases, not even a shortage of money. When I talk to people with huge funds, they say that we've got lots of money, but not a lot of projects to really invest in, because of this inability to operationalize the lessons that we are learning from the past. So that was September. We also had the climate summit, COP28. And leading to that, I want to acknowledge that 2023 was the hottest year ever. It was the time when there were droughts in places, there were huge floods and cyclonic activities in areas that have never in the past actually experienced cyclones before. Right? The Great Barrier Reef, the bleaching is going on. Food insecurity has raised, bushfires everywhere. And 2003 is again another signal for us that what we aspire to in 2015 has gone horribly wrong. And as a result of that, in December 2023, we had the COP28, huge gathering of people, and I, again, was very fortunate to be there as part of an Australian delegation. And the one thing that I see was this huge disconnect between people, what I believe to be the thought leaders and the negotiators and the decision makers. There's this huge disconnect. More importantly, Australia at that time was coming up with this new energy policy. Hydrogen was what we're doing. Forgetting that, in fact, the whole viability of hydrogen is so dependent on access to fresh water. And the world is already running out of fresh water. And that disconnect continued to permeate through a lot of government policies. So I've set the scene in a very somber mood, but I think I needed to do that to basically at the same time remind ourselves of the opportunities of nations coming together, the opportunities for the developed world to spend more money, creating a huge climate fund for mitigation and adaptation. In COP28, the notion that water, food, and health was in fact escalated to presidential levels, that it is now an active discussion. And it is symptomatic of the fact that globally, our leaders are also now shifting from a prior emphasis on climate mitigation actions to now actually striking a better balance in terms of climate adaptation. And why it is significant is that there is a realization that with temperature increase, change in climate is before us, is here. And that whilst the effort to try and control and reduce emission and reduce temperature rise is still very important, we actually have to act very quickly on thinking about initiative for climate adaptation. Yeah, because you can reduce your carbon emission as much as you like, but the reality is that there are extreme events happening that would not normally happen in the past. Now, with climate adaptation, I just want to make this point, that in fact, a significant part of the impacts of climate change are manifested through water. Droughts, floods, pollution and degradation of water quality that lead to diseases, or indirectly, in terms of its impact on food security, on public health, even in times how we respond to heat waves and wildfires. And that when you look at the context whereby since the beginning of the issues of climate, whereby climate mitigation was the real focus, it seems to be in the domain of the energy people. And that we were largely sitting on the side looking at what's going on. But that shift to climate adaptation and the realization that so much of climate impacts are manifested but could be moderated through water really require those of us that are in the water sector to step up and actually start to take some leadership in this whole process of climate action. Now, of course, I come back to the Agenda 2030, and there's a lot of work being done, and the water sector is also basically saying that water management, in fact, do permeate through a whole bunch of other SDGs. In some work that my research group undertook, we actually looked at the 169 targets in the 17 SDG and asked the question, would water management directly contribute or help in attaining those targets? And our conclusion is quite compelling, that 50 of the 169 SDGs are directly influenced by how you manage water. And a further 34 is indirectly influenced. And of course, water influence, if you look like all of the targets that sits under SDG for sustainable cities and communities in one way or another. Of course, water and sanitation, that goes without saying. But look at that, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, how water can actually help support that, and a whole bunch of it. So my point in this slide is to basically impress upon you that the way we manage water permeates through a lot of all these factors, and the way we manage water permeates through your entire city. The interconnection and if you like, the type of synergy that could come from water, its nexus, how water underpins sustainability and resilience, is clearly highlighted when we look at cities. When we look at cities, one of the things that we realize immediately is that cities are the powerhouse of the economic development of any countries, because that's where ultimately people focus. But at the same time, cities are like melting pots, whereby the one place converges all of the challenges that you can imagine in SDG, because it's just the one place, right? The intersection of so many challenges in the one place also lends itself to the impact of the effect of the impact of those challenges being magnified. Right? Magnified through human impact, magnified through economic damage, magnified through the disruption in global economy. But at the same time, they do provide the opportunity for us to rethink about how our cities need to operate to harness the opportunities that this convergence of challenges do bring together. And the opportunities stems from the fact that the global investments in infrastructure is huge in cities, because many of the developing world particularly are having cities trying to keep up with the growing middle class. As more and more migrations come into the city, there's huge infrastructure plan and infrastructure investments that go into them. But if you look at what is on the drawing board for those infrastructure, you'll be astonished to see that they are based on traditional, conventional approach to infrastructure delivery, which is highly fragmented. It doesn't recognize the interactions and the interplay between all the different sectors. And if you do not recognize that intersection and interplay, what does it mean? It means that often one or two dominant sectors will make decisions on city infrastructure, and there's a whole bunch of unintended consequences, some good, but others not so good, that will happen because we fail to recognize the interaction across those sectors. Now, I just want to focus my talk on water and then maybe make some comments about issues of water and energy and so on and so forth. But even within water, traditionally, you find that we have fragmentized how we actually look at water. Water supply, I mean, I've told this story many times. Until recently, I provide More recently, I provide strategic advice to the Asian Development Bank. And the whole idea there was to help them to rethink about developing their packages, infrastructure packages for the developing world. What do? They go in and say, well, if you want a water supply, I will give you a loan for water supply. And 2 years later, they'll say, oh, you want some sewage? I'll give you a loan for sewage. And when everybody is nice and happy, say, oh, you got some flooding? You want some loan for flooding? We'll give you some loan for infrastructure flooding. And yet, this whole notion of water supply, sewage, black water as a resource, which you all know in Singapore, right? And drainage and flooding, and how the whole concept of actually dealing with excess water, flood water, is not actually integrated in any way. So as a result of that, some of the work that I was very privileged to be part of, way back in 2003, during the time that I was here in Singapore, at that time I was doing a lot of research work on biomimicry and understanding integration of green infrastructure to gray. And by about 2007, a lot of the early conceptualization of what does it all mean, that ABC water, for instance, is not just a piece of infrastructure. It is how we need to think about how a system within a city works. And after much research, we published in 2009 the Water Sensitive City Principles of Practice. We were beginning to then think about how do we frame the theory of how you actually foster better water management, what I refer to in my title of contemporary water management. And part of that authorship team, Professor Brown, she's a social scientist, and she was able to unpack a lot of the historical development of infrastructure in city for us to ultimately come up with 3 key principles of a water-sensitive city. And these are the 3. And since 2009, wherever I travel, I have used this to frame the type of questions that I would ask in how a city functions. Because we argue that a water-sensitive city, or whatever you like to call it, in China they call it a sponge city. But we ask the question wherever we go is, what are the initiatives that we would do to ensure and help transition our cities to be a water supply catchment? It needs to be simple in terms of easy to remember, but our message was, how do you actually foster a diversity of sources within the city and a diversity of supply scale, and that we should look from within our city to secure our water supply before we actually start to harness resources from outside our city. I'll come back to that in a minute. The second was that we should start to think about designing our cities to provide ecosystem services. Now, there's a complete turnaround, because most cities in the world, when we design and build them, we take ecosystem services from the environment. And the most classic of the type of ecosystem service we take from the environment is when our city discharge pollution into the environment and expect the environment to clean it up. And when the density wasn't there, the environment did do a good job in assimilating the waste. That is a literal sense of actually taking the ecosystem service that the natural environment takes away. And we argue that cities of the future need to be designed to provide ecosystem services. We also argue that cities must comprise of water-sensitive communities, meaning the social political capital for sustainability must be fostered within that. Now, let me just get down into detail now. Let's start with the first one. Cities as water supply catchment, what does it mean? If you were to break it down, it would mean that we should perhaps explore our cities in our effort to look at diversity of sources, at a whole bunch of things like water recycling, fit-for-purpose use of water, stormwater, groundwater, water cyclical, and many more. But from that one principle of practice, we actually fundamentally ask the question, do we need water at potable standard for everything that we use? We asked that question. Are there water resources within the city that we should harness? Are we able to create a water circular economy within the city to reduce its demand for external sources? And what are some of the practical examples that you can refer to with this principle? I'll start with Singapore. Singapore, over the time, have actually developed a policy that ultimately lead to its four national taps policy. Yeah? It is really a strong effort to do that. And ABC Waters was in fact chasing, if you like, the last bastion of water sources, rainwater, stormwater, not a drop to be left unharnessed. Yeah. But that is, if you like, the type of policy position that drives this concept. It may not be, and I am sure it wasn't when PUB and others conceived the need to diversify its water sources, but it is nevertheless driven by, whether it's stated or not, this concept that we need to diversify. We can't be dependent on one source, way too vulnerable. And we move through the notion of looking at diversity of supply scale. Are there things that we can harness locally? One of the things that you do need to remember is that moving water around is expensive business. Yeah? 1 cubic meter is a ton. Yeah? So if we can harness locally to reduce the amount of water that we need to move around, then we are creating that environment. Now, there are some of course, other examples of the same concepts, and some of them, perhaps, again, they are different contexts. This is what I want to stress, that the same principle is delivered in different forms, whereby if it wasn't pointed out to you, you may think there are different strategies. But in fact, in Melbourne, we are developing Fisherman's Bend at the moment, a whole new precinct of accommodating 120,000 people, right? The trouble with that, Fisherman's Bend, is that it is in the city, whereby Melbourne, which is like any other traditional cities, still do, but gets the majority of its water supply from the big dams outside the city. And many of its sewage is collected and then pumped to another treatment plant called the Werribee treatment plant somewhere else. Now, what happens when you actually renew an area and put 120,000 people in there? You need more water, yes? And you got more sewage. What do? Do you duplicate your water supply pipes coming into the dam, build another dam? Just sort of think of the infrastructure costs. And do you then build bigger pump stations to pump the sewage to the farm? Or do you actually start to think about overlaying the traditional infrastructure with new infrastructure that promotes the city as a water supply catchment? Some of the examples given, this whole notion of looking at whereby there's a huge sewer line. Sewer mining actually came a solution whereby, first of all, the recognition that we don't need to have drinking water standard for everything, and that we're going to run 2 pipes into all the new buildings. The purple pipe, which is for non-drinking purposes, and the drinking pipe. The drinking water pipe is still coming from the dams outside because Melbourne has got some fantastic water quality. But the non-drinking water pipe is now being harvested from the sewer in that system, okay, to reuse that. But at the same time, it also says that some of the grey water, at least, could be harnessed locally and reused locally. And what does that do? That immediately reduces 50% of the wastewater load from the catchment, because close to 50% of the sewage water that is generated is from grey water, showers, hand basins, and so on. And if you could actually start to think about that, you immediately reduce the amount of water, sewage that needs to be pumped from that development. So these are sort of some of the examples of where now you apply the same principles, but now for different, using different ways. And of course, because you are designing a new area, you have the opportunity through proper policy to introduce new building requirements in terms of how the building got to be plumbed and so on. I move to the next one, again in Australia, whereby in Adelaide, as you moved, one of the things that I also want to, as you move from the east, Sydney and Melbourne across to the west, the climate gets drier, but more importantly, more seasonal. There are distinct dry periods, and then there are distinct wet periods. In Adelaide, they started to harvest stormwater, run it through wetlands to treat them, but usually when it's raining, there's usually too much water already, right? And the dry period, evaporation is a killer. And what do? They decide to inject that into the ground in Adelaide. Right? So they harvest locally, look at groundwater injection as a means of storing the water, and when the dry season comes, pull the water back out. And so now the reservoir is underground in your aquifers. In Perth, as we go further and further to the west, whereby there's hardly, with climate change, particularly hardly any water left, they have gone one step further to say, hang on, we're going to do some whole bunch of research to look at what level of treatment we would do to our wastewater so that we can inject that into the ground. So they are now harvesting their wastewater and basically looking at groundwater replenishment. So from managed aquifer recharge as a concept to now groundwater replenishment systems. And a month ago, we have a delegation from Abu Dhabi that is asking specifically that question, that they are resigned to the fact that they are needing to have desalination plant. They can't avoid that. But what they can avoid is how do I reduce the demand management of that by actually looking at alternative water sources. And they are now exploring how groundwater replenishment is part of the solution to this. So the diversity of water sources becomes really important. And the project that I was involved in China, in the city of Hetian, Western China, desert country. Yeah. This is one of the main rivers there. And the opportunity there was to do with snowmelt. That you have this river whereby in summer, significant snowmelt have actually led to a huge amount of water through this. And a simple strategy really was to look at how we can harness snowmelt and infiltrate that into the groundwater system as a means of harvesting that water through that system. Now, not everything is as nice and as simple as it is. And one of the reasons why I wanted to impress upon you, first of all, about the different contexts of cities as water supply catchments is the notion also of small island development states. Right? This is a Marshall Island, and they have problems. And you might think that they have problems from sea level rise. This is just a blow up of one of the two cities in there. But their biggest problem is actually with sea level rise. Saltwater intrusion into their groundwater system is their biggest problem, right? And really, that problem has really occupied a lot of my mind in terms of how do you actually introduce such concepts to it. And I don't have, to be honest, I really don't have an answer. You know, there's not enough rain, and even when it's rain, there's not enough catchments. Their groundwater system, you try to store, is continually being contaminated by seawater from sea level rise. So it is an important issue. But this issue is, of course, coupled by sea level rise, and this is the prediction of the flooded areas to this, which prompts me to think that one of the things that we might learn from some of the Singapore initiative is this whole concept of coastal protection initiative. And what is it that we need to do to actually think about coastal protection, the economics of that? How could nations, poor nations like this, actually learn from the interrelationship between infrastructure for coastal protection and the economy that you want to generate from there. We've seen some snippets of it now in Fiji, for instance. Last year, they introduced a blue bond that is leading to coastal protection, whereby the whole notion of coastal protection is part of land reclamation, which is then linked to private sector investment for aquaculture, lobster farming, in that sense, right? So the need for a business case really need to come into it. Which brings me to this topic, and I've diverted because I came and all I hear about in the last few days is the Long Island project. And I said, what is this Long Island project, right? And here it is, incredibly ambitious Long Island project. And a number of observations that I like to make first and foremost. You know, the Long Island project as it's conceived, it's really to some degree a souped up version of Marina Bay. Yeah. You know, you guys have got great experience in delivering Marina Bay, and you're now much more ambitious to do that. And that's great. The question that I do have, of course, is the whole sustainability in terms of water quality management of that water body. Marina Bay is blessed with a large catchment. And so this whole regular recirculation, flushing of that actually, to some degree, helped in maintaining its water quality. Now, I also believe, and this is just my belief, that Marina Bay was one of the catalysts to ABC Waters. And ABC Waters, in its very core, was actually about how do you introduce systems throughout the catchment to cleanse the stormwater before it even gets to Marina Bay. How do you avoid all the conditions that makes it conducive to poor water quality algal blooms due to pollution from our catchments? How do you manage that? It's going to be a little bit more difficult when you look at the size of the water body and the size of the catchment that actually drains to it. And that there will need to be some further thinking about how do you maintain the quality of the water body in the Long Island project, which if you look at the context, Marina Bay here is actually less exposed to. And my understanding when I first came in 2005, when I looked at the data, was that even that was at times at risk of having water quality problems, which actually prompted the need for us to think about retrofitting the catchment for cleansing. Which leads me to the next principle of practice, that cities need to be designed to provide ecosystem services. And some of the ecosystem services that are obvious are, of course, nature-based solutions for water, creating ecological landscapes and corridors for biodiversity, urban microclimate enhancement, water cleansing, which was really a key driver in the ABC Waters in that sense. I'll come to that in a minute. Water rehabilitation, flood mitigation. So basically, I'm saying that we should actually think about designing our cities to actually deliver all of this, while at the same time greening our cities. A question that's always asked of me was, what do I think about ABC Water? Right? And I'll be the first to admit that when I was part of the team here, I often feel like I'm the poor cousin in ABC Water, because if you look at the investment to activate sites, which is the A, to beautify the site, the B, and then clean, yeah? And that there was a huge amount of urban design investment in activating sites, poor sites in terms of creating that. You just have to look at some of the development, beautiful site. And then we actually start to work on the delivery of systems to actually keep the system clean. And what might they be? And I like to just show some examples of, again, Singapore experience. Most of you will recognize this picture, which is, of course, from Bishan Park, and the biotopes that was designed to provide the cleansing. While there was a small team amongst us, which I have the great privilege to be part of, was already testing the rain garden in Balam Estate. In 2008, it was constructed in there. And I went out to look at some of this. This is just a snippet of our construction program in the rain garden in Balam Estate. I went out to Bishan Park last year, and it really has held up really well. This is now 13 years after its construction. Amazing. I also took the opportunity when I was here to go out to Balam Estate, and this is what I see. This is 15 years. It really demonstrates that if there's anybody that can maintain infrastructure well, it's you guys. Yeah. But I'm not sure, and by the way, there's a picture here of me about to be run over by a bike. Did the bike come past already? It did. So I'm about to be run over by a jogger there. Got too enthusiastic. But the rain garden bioretentions. The rain garden bioretentions are basically to soak the rainwater that comes through, filter it through a filter, and then discharge into the canal and find its way into Marina Bay. But I was really impressed with this. But at the same time, there are other ABC water features that perhaps not doing so well. And in fact, I know of one that has been demolished, which I'm disappointed about, and I wonder why. But I think I do know why, in that while demonstrating this, there is still a work to be done to look at how different agencies actually come together to co-invest and co-own some of these things. My understanding was that this particular project, which was actually an amazing wetland that we designed, next to a park connector that got removed because it was replaced by a park connector, right? So, and from memory, we actually had to negotiate with NParks to get some compensation that the park connector in certain sections do not always have to be 3 meters wide. But I guess we lost that argument. But my point here is that Singapore have had demonstrated experience of how you can actually integrate nature-based solutions into their urbanscapes that actually serve almost like kidneys in the city. And if you can do that, then the water downstream, like in Marina Bay, would be protected. And this is not exclusive to Singapore. I wanted to show Singapore first because I'm in Singapore. This is in Melbourne. This system was the very first system that we built in Melbourne, and that is now nearly 30 years ago. Right? The trees have grown, but this actually provides a significant level of flood protection for that region, and at the same time provide cleansing. Flood protection when it's flooding, but when it's just simply raining, that water is cleansed by this system here, and the same concept is now being introduced further and further into downtown Melbourne. This is something that we did in Kunshan in China, whereby we formed a partnership with the city of Kunshan, and in the space of 10 years, completely transformed the whole city. And that is because, like most Chinese cities, they are being developed like there's no tomorrow. Yeah, it's before now. Now they have no more money, and their quest for knowledge and innovation was just amazing. It was a fantastic place to work in. I was the CEO of the CRC for Water Sensitive City, set up by the Australian government to transform Australian cities. And I find myself actually working in China because it was much easier to transform the city of Kunshan than it was to transform the city of Melbourne. But we were introducing all of this sort of nature-based solutions into building. We then basically say, hey, what are you guys doing in major infrastructure development? And they said, we're building a high-speed rail. We're building a ring road. And I said, look, that is the corridors that we should take real advantage of. And they said, yep, fine. And this is what they've done, right? Every road corridor and high-speed rail corridor along there is all equipped with all of these nature-based solutions that do water cleansing, flood detentions throughout the system. all of you would recognize that road interchanges are a bunch of really poorly used space, which we captured and addressed. And so Kunshan just 2 years ago won the government award for being the sponge city, the exemplar sponge city for China. And this is a county level city. But enough of boasting, I want to come back to Singapore. You guys have done that too in terms of the importance of corridors. There are two things that frame a city: the drainage corridor and the road corridor. What you do there actually frames how green your city can be, how well managed its water would be in this case, right? And the bold decision, and I need to acknowledge that all of these pictures actually came from Herbert Dreisaitel's website. That bold decision to do that, which I do credit Mr. Koo here as one of the drivers, really gives us a vision of how you can transform your cities by maintaining corridors, but actually revitalizing that through the type of work that you see in here. Its ability to maintain flood conveyance in there means that you can actually have that space, the livable space, that provides all of those ecosystem services that I talk about. Back to China, to finish this point, in that the introduction of ecosystem services in cities cuts across all the scales. What you can do in individual buildings in the forecourt, all the way to what you can do in huge transport corridors. And if you combine all of that, you'll find that the receiving water, your rivers and your creeks, will be protected. I'd like to finish with this whole notion of cities comprising water-sensitive communities. And I make three things. What is the water-sensitive communities? The first is that government actually is able to develop what I refer to as enabling policies. Not prescriptive, but enabling, to enable innovation. The water sector, the professionals, the practitioners in our city needs to be equipped with tools and knowledge to enable them to innovate. Right? And community actually needs to understand their relationship with water, their exposure to water, and how their action influence water. Now, again, on the surface of it, it's very sort of basic, generic principle of practice. Here, we talk about how do you actually help government develop policies that recognize the need for context flexibility. That policy that is prescriptive is just no longer relevant. How do you do that? And how do you provide evidence to do this? How do you introduce innovation to our sector? Courses, undergraduate courses, postgraduate courses, the power of demonstration. I keep hammering about the importance of demonstration to take government officials and practitioners to see those projects. And how do you encourage people to understand why that rain garden at Balam Estate is full? Why it is important to maintain that, why you shouldn't dump your rubbish into it. Not that Singaporeans do it, but I can tell you other countries would. Yeah? So that is the three things that drive that principle. And of course, I come back to Singapore. Policy. Right? What drive ABC water? What drive the diversity of water sources? In terms of water sector ability to innovate, again, PUB have really over these years, I've just been continually impressed and amazed about the type of technical guidance and design guidance that help foster the implementation of that. Really important in building that whole development of a water-sensitive city. And of course, I'm not sure whether this is still running, but when I was there, the whole introduction of accreditation courses that is sponsored by the engineers, the Institute of Engineers, as well as the Institute of Architects, to actually start to ensure that professionals have the knowledge to design and oversee construction of such innovations. And again, you can see how every one of those principles that I touch on, there is an example of what the Singaporeans are doing. I just want to finish by basically talking about the emergence of digital technology and how that is also changing the way that water is being managed. Real-time control, sensors, automations are now here to actually help us improve on our actions. First of all, real-time controls in terms of fit-for-purpose water harvesting. I'm not suggesting that this is something that's done here, but there are many cities that divert water from the river as part of their harvesting. And what they divert is actually dependent on the quality of the water. And that can actually significantly improve on the efficiency of your water treatment facilities, what you divert. Similarly, this whole notion of the operation of your water treatment plant, on your wastewater treatment plant, to increase its energy efficiency and to reduce the type of wastage is now before us in terms of how digital technology can help the water sector actually deliver much better performances. But there are also real-time control management that influence the way we manage floods. Just the notion of connecting flood forecasting with information to the community. In some places, the automation of floodgates, they're linked to them. And the one that I'm really pleased and wanting to encourage on is this smart tunnel in Kuala Lumpur. And I have actually seen it in operation whereby this is a transport infrastructure which happens to be a bit of a drainage at the bottom. But when it floods, they close off lanes to let flood water through as a flood mitigation measures. So that whole connection is really impressive. Another thing that really impressed me was a colleague of mine in Korea, in University of Seoul, that actually conceived and demonstrated the concept of how you can reduce flooding in a build-up area. You know how this urban renewal is about increasing the building stock, if you like, of your city, but quite often it's within the context that it needs to accommodate existing infrastructure, drainage infrastructure, because that's really expensive. And I'd like to show you this video that Professor Han has really pioneered. That is his life work, and I really want to acknowledge that.
Early this
Just have a
year,
look at the
the
video.
Seoul Metropolitan Government also announced new plans for rainwater management. The most noteworthy idea was a remote monitoring system that uses the internet and satellites. The critical factor in the system is the fact that using remote control, it can empty the rainwater tank in each building within just 5 hours. The water flowing out of these tanks will be directed to nearby streams or undercurrents to avert overflowing of the rivers. And the emptied tanks will hold rainwater again. It is a world-first technology that can prevent flood damage resulting from torrential downpours.
So the concept is that when your density is really high, the majority of your impervious area that generates drainage is actually your roof. If all of your roof are actually connected to a rainwater tank, not only are you harvesting water to be used in the building, you can now use this as a flood management control, which is what we're now adopting in that Docklands in the new precinct. It does require us to be able to forecast rain well, almost nowcasting. And what they've done in Korea is to be able to actually see the movement cloud and actually see that there are storm clouds coming. And in anticipation of that storm cloud raining, they discharge their rainwater tank. So that when it rains, all of the roof area do not contribute to drainage. They all get stored back in the tank. And suddenly you find that you have an area that might be, 80% impervious, actually behaves like it's only 20% impervious because the majority of the rain is actually stored in the tank, by preempting the rain and discharging and creating capacity for the tank. Now, we have done further analysis from Professor Han's concept when we were looking at Melbourne, whereby we actually worked out that if that rainwater tank was connected to even the top 3 residential floors, the water usage will be such whereby the tank are generally empty. Right? So you don't even need to rely on good forecasting. You just need to make sure that the rainwater tank, the rainwater that's harvested is the first water that you use for non-drinking purposes in the buildings. And because it's the first water you use, it always drains that down. And when you run out of water, then you use your other water sources, like the recycled wastewater. But if it's the first water, you have this assurance that it will be drained. Now, the size of the tank and the number of people living in this high-rise are such whereby we've argued that it doesn't even need to go beyond 3 floors. In the end, the decision was made to connect to all floors, basically by saying that the same, whether it's recycled water or rainwater, would be connected to that purple pipe to do it. Yeah? But what that does is that it actually reduces the need for us to increase our stormwater pipe sizes, even though we increase the density, the roof coverage of that area. So again, I just want to acknowledge Professor Han's sort of incredible innovation in this regard. And finally, the role of digital technology in information to actually change people's behavior is another significant advancement whereby I actually now know what my water usage is. Not that it makes any difference to my water usage, but at least I know. And I can anticipate what my water bill is and all that. So a lot of the information feedback is really part of also how you actually build our water-sensitive communities. So I finish with this slide, that the opportunity is before us simply by the fact that urbanization is going full bore, especially in our region in Asia. What comes with urbanization is investment, infrastructure investment. What our role is to ensure that they harness that investment opportunity to pivot and transition our city. There is no need to go into a city and change everything in one hit. All cities are dynamic. They are constantly renewing, and it's how our policy and our innovation can actually come to foster that transformation in our city. And therefore, in summary, we are in trouble. Whether it is about climate actions or whether it's Agenda 2030, we are in trouble. But we, because of the global shift in thinking about climate adaptation as now a significant priority, we have an opportunity to actually influence the transformation of our cities. And water is a really critical element to it, no matter how you look at it, whether you're interested in floods, whether you're interested in water supply, whether you're interested in drainage, we all have an influence on how we can transform our cities. Our concepts of a water-sensitive city, I'm not saying it's for everybody, but I have to say that those 3 principles have really guided the way that I have advised government by simply asking the question, not providing an answer, but simply saying, what would you do to look at diversifying your water sources? If you were harvesting storm water from your city, would it change the planning rules in your city to make sure that you reduce the level of pollution in your city, seeing that your city is now a water supply catchment? We ask questions about what are the type of ecosystem services that we should embed into it. And it doesn't have to be water, it could be air quality. For instance, I was talking about a project with the NUS master plan about the notion of green walls being a very good filter for carbon monoxide in cars. And that's why many noise walls are now actually introducing nature-based solutions as part of pollution control. Now, the red dot is a great beacon because every one of those principles, you all have experience in that. But I do urge you to look beyond the physical project and the principles that drives it, and really strengthen your perspective on how those experiences can be adapted to your region. And one of the things that I'm very passionate about this time around is this whole notion of coastal protection, because there are many, many small island states in your region that actually need coastal protection more than you do. But they can't deal with that simply because of the lack of financial power to do this. But an understanding of the co-relationship between coastal protection and the economic development and revitalization behind it might provide us with some insight on how we could do this for small island development states. And the red dot has got a very important leadership role outside of Singapore that I want to challenge you on. That you've done amazing things in here, and for good reason. And also, Singapore is unique. It's a microcosm that has got significant economic power within a very small footprint. So you can do things. But I urge you to think about the experience that you're doing this and then adapting that to how you would actually influence and provide leadership in this region. On that note, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor, for that very inspiring lecture. I would now like to invite the moderator for the evening, Professor Yong. Professor Yong Kwee Thieu is Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering and formerly the Senior Vice President of Campus Infrastructure at NUS, where he oversaw the university's largest capital expansion, including the 1 billion sustainable development of University Town, as well as implemented the Cool NUS and Carbon Neutral Campus 2030 roadmap. Professor Yong's research and professional work are a microcosm of the infrastructure development in Singapore and the region. In the past 45 years, he has been involved in over 100 major coastal reclamation, underground and infrastructure projects, published more than 200 papers, and delivered over 30 keynote guest lectures at international conferences. He served on several key national and professional committees, including the Development Project Advisory Panel for Ministry of Finance. He was a member of the Expert Panel on Enhancing Flood Protection in Singapore, MEWR, in 2011-2012, and was recently appointed as the chairman for PUB Coastal Protection Expert Panel. We look forward to this moderated session.
Thank you. Okay, I'm asked to moderate, so I'll probably, while you gather your thoughts on what question, let me just fire out the first question to Tony. I think in the beginning you mentioned that you're going to talk something about energy with the water. Along the way, I think it may up, so I'm going to give you another opportunity to address, because we actually, in Singapore, Tony, in Singapore, as you mentioned, we have 4 taps. Now, PUB is beginning to look at the 2 taps, which is desalination and the new water. Both are high energy guzzler. The carbon footprint is very high. So now we are struggling between ensuring there are 4 taps, but then looking that we have a challenge with the energy management, especially as we expect that the demand for water is going to grow, and therefore carbon footprint is going to grow. On the other hand, the government wants to get the carbon footprint down. Do you want to have some comments on the energy part?
Well, the only comment that I have really is that the water energy nexus cuts both ways in that way. Now, traditionally now, we know that the water is in high demand for energy generation. Hydrogen is better, but still very dependent on energy. Then when you look at the embedded water in batteries, that is also something that is not taken care of in that sense. So the comment that I really wanted to make was that what we refer to in the working group that I'm part of, the water dependency, need to start to be factored into renewable energy consideration. The other, of course, is that in another study that we did, energy efficiency in water appliances actually is huge. In fact, we compared in a city of Melbourne, the amount of energy saving from energy efficient water appliances to the operation of our water treatment plant and wastewater plant. The energy saving gains from communities is so much higher, right? So that actually drives a lot of policies about how you go about actually looking at that. So that understanding the water energy nexus is important. I did talk about the notion of now having many water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants are now approaching net zero, certainly in Australia. And a lot of that is through efficiency of the energy use, recovery, both of heat and of or of the biosolids, and how that is being used to generate are some of the initiatives that are going on. But interesting, you mentioned that when the delegation from Abu Dhabi came to visit us last month, all I can offer, and of course it's the same old, they rock up and they ask you really difficult questions and you try and sound smart, but you're struggling to work what's going on. And really all I can offer is really the concept of hierarchy of use. The things that you need to do to reduce both water and energy has to do with the concept of a circular economy. And so planning then come into place. How do you cluster users to actually start to optimize that? And yesterday, or Monday in the discussion, I know that in university environments such as Monash University, there are many -80 refrigerators that generates amazing amount of heat, and that if we can harness that to actually support the hot water services for your student accommodation, that is sort of the beginning of how you could actually start to think about this water energy nexus, and that the concept of recovery is not really restricted to just water. It should be restricted to other forms of energy as well. So I just wanted to make that point that as we, and this is a point made too in COP, is that most of us are still trying to rationalize integrated water management. The integration of management for water supply, sewage, and drainage and flooding. We're still trying to reconcile in our water sector that, let alone think about the water energy nexus, the water food nexus, which really is before us. So I again am looking for places whereby, places like Singapore, where you have already really developed a very good framework for integrated water management to actually start to think about how you actually promote the type of circular economy, and how that circular economy is part of your coastal protection strategy, for instance, is where I would like to see you drive, because the investment is going to be there. Good planning and good selection of different enterprises within your coastal protection can actually promote a whole bunch of all those other outcomes.
Yeah, I'm Adrian Law from NUS. So thanks very much, Tony, for your very exciting lecture. I want to ask you questions about the last bit, which is on the forecasting. Right? I think a lot of us are excited by ChatGPT AI development and essentially the ability to forecast, right? And it is now translating to also the potential in terms of urban water management, right? So it's also almost a transition from previously what we call water managers, right? That means we only react, but now we have the potential that we manage water. We proactively manage water by tapping on AI and all this forecasting capability, right? So how do you see the transition happening around the world, and what are the limitations and constraints?
Yeah. Look, so the industry largely have already gone from forecasting to nowcasting. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have much better handle on real-time control. Yeah? And that there's enough power to actually continually update your forecasting such that it becomes nowcasting. And I remember in 2005, when I was here, maybe 2006, when I wanted to introduce Professor Han's concept to Singapore. And I think it was around the time when I think Orchard Road got flooded. And there was this huge government outcry for it. And I sort of say, and there was work thinking of doing, smoothening the concrete line channel. And I sort of say, the uncertainty of what the roughness coefficient is between a smooth concrete and a rough concrete is such whereby you're really grasping at straws there. And wanted to introduce this whole concept that maybe you should invest in putting rainwater tanks in every one of those HDB flats and automate it this way. Right? Because at that time, Singapore already has a very good sort of dashboard for automation. The biggest difficulty when I get into discussion is our ability to nowcast. Now, Singapore is a very small landmass, and so when it rains. You do not have time to react. And we had to use radar. There was no other way of doing nowcasting. And the technology then was that the correlation between radar and actually being able to predict the amount of rainfall is still quite low. But things have actually changed a lot now, right? The things are smarter. AI is able to process, and it's like a neural network on steroids, basically. Yeah? It can nowcast so quickly that it is worth, in my mind, considering. And that's not for the rainwater. It has to do with almost everything that you do in Singapore. Because I have to say that the more you go to the coastal protection scenario, the more you really need to rethink your drainage. Because the drainage is no longer by gravity. Yeah, the minute you go to coastal. So then you've got to think about how you're going to move water around. And that has got to be a process of smart sensors and real-time control in that regard. So I don't know if I've answered your question other than that AI sensors, really cheap sensors that are connected to rapid processings are now here for us to actually operate. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Melis. I'm a Sorry. I'm a master's student from Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And my question would be more, so you mentioned the importance of smaller islands and, the importance of developing their coastal protection infrastructure. How would you suggest they go about this? Do we need FDI? Do we need funding from international institutions such as the ADB? And how would they then maintain those infrastructures? Because those are huge infrastructures, and would they have the resource to then maintain those to protect themselves effectively?
It's a really good question. It's a common question to all forms of innovation. Is how do you make that? It's not just about the capital cost. Yeah, it is about its operation and maintenance. It's about local capacity to operate and maintain these things. And in the case of coastal protection, it's about understanding the nexus between economic development and coastal protection and how you promote private sector investment in that. That, for me, is the only way that small island development states, this is the poor islands, right? That's the only way that they can afford the type of grand infrastructure that we're thinking about. But at the same time, I hope that in developing like the Long Island project, that there is enough exploration of what other alternative systems might there be. Some of them may not promote the type of land take that deliver the economic development. Some might be. So, this whole idea of the form of coastal protection becomes really important. And so, like I said, I don't have an answer other than that I am urging enterprises in Singapore to not just look inwardly as you embark on your coastal protection journey, but also look at how you can adapt some of your solutions to poor small island states. And it is about the nexus to enterprises. It's about the type of solutions which is more costly, which are more palatable, and so on. There are other parts of Singapore that are looking at mangrove restoration as a means of coastal protection. But in the sense of it, it can protect you from storm surges, but it doesn't protect you from sea level rise. Yeah? So there has got to be a hybrid of some sort, because the most damage usually happens when storm surge combines with sea level rise that cause the type of flooding that we have. So I don't have an answer other than that I know that there's a lot of investment in Singapore on this at the moment, and I want to try and leverage that to actually provide some answers regionally.
Yeah. To follow up, I think 2 years ago at the Singapore SIWW 2 years ago, Tony was actually chairing a session on small sea level rise in Pacific Islands and the low-lying islands. And he made the same plea, and I heard him, and I say that yes, in Singapore, as we start to do our adaptive planning and implementation, we have 300 kilometers, small, but we have 300 kilometers of coastline, but we have 8 different coastal typographies. I did assure Tony that Singapore will try to be a thought leader. In all the typography that we try, we should try different solutions, how it works, and how can we actually share some of our findings, to the other people. And one of the things that we are going to do is, you probably know, Tony, the coming SWW, for the first time, there'll be a special session on coastal protection. And I think this is where we will start to share whatever we have found so far to this. So rest assured, I think Singapore had that in mind about working together with the regional countries and so on, and how can we be the thought leader on that part. Now, if I can, just give me a bit of time there's a question from the online person. This is my good friend, he's a consultant. Chi Yong Kwan, I don't know whether you're hearing, I'm just repeating your question. Siltation is a serious problem in dam barrages, and harvesting of water from the ground and landscape in this region is observed in the Kallang Basin. How do you solve these against nature-based solution, since we lack land, dense landscape swales for more filtration and settlement?
It's a good question, but I think that question is based on the assumption that the bulk of your treatment system is at a trunk drainage scale, maybe. Let me put it the other way, that a lot of the work we've done, and you've seen my slide about the scale of implementations, that the best thing, just like anything else, the best thing is source control. Right? What you can do within the footprint of your own development in managing the pollution impact, the pollution footprint is really the best option we have. Because siltation and sediment transport and suspended solids is very much part of an urban characteristics. But if you can actually arrest that through the way you manage flow velocities, and you arrest that in terms of highly diffuse solution, you find that you will find that there is actually a much more sustainable solution that has a lower level of operation and maintenance demand than you would expect if you actually get to a point whereby siltation is now at the bottom of a pond or water body at the end of a large catchment, because all of the energy from that catchment is used to carry the type of sediment to the pond, while if you can actually arrest that type of sediment at the source, that becomes important. Now, if you actually think about that concept and use that to drive how podiums and local landscapes within the immediate surround of the building can be configured, you find that you now have a highly diffuse, dispersed means of sediment control. And that's the type of approach that we have been adopting in Australia.
Thank you.
Hi, Prof. Wong. My name is Derek from HDB. In fact, we met many years back. Would like to have a better understanding of the situation in your home country, I mean Melbourne, and also in China. Are the local community embracing all this system? Are they like, you know, when the layman walk past this type of system, do they know all these system are WSUD? Are they, do they have the urge to throw litters in? You know, yeah, I would like to know the general, you know, situation.
Australian cities have got a bigger litter problem than Singapore. So let's start with that, right? And that you can get 99 out of 100 people across the line in their appreciation of what that is, and you still have one that will litter it. So this is not fail-safe in that sense, nor are conventional infrastructure fail-safe in that regard. Are they aware of it? When I first started, like in Australia, first of all, I have to say Australia water-sensitive urban design is a policy. It is in all local government requirements that they need to do that. So, you know, for me, it's a real privilege to see how what started in the early 1990s as a concept has now found its way into policy. And what has happened too is that because it's found its way into policy, almost every consultant in Australia can do this very well, right? So you find how you create a critical mass for that. Similarly, when we first started, everybody, including the contractors, think that we are crazy. That's not how we build things, and things goes wrong. And community wondering why is there a hole in the ground rather than it's supposed to be a mound. So we introduced the whole concept of information boards and all that. And in fact, in Balam, you know, I couldn't remember where it was, but when I Googled Balam Estate, you know what came up? Balam Rain Garden came up in Google, right? Now, that is the type of community engagement that needs to be there. That's the type whereby they need to know that this little bit is contributing to the health of Marina Bay, which happens to be their water supply. Yeah, so that sort of social water-sensitive community is about that. In China, at the moment, you know, it is very difficult. So that the maintenance cost is high. Yeah, just rubbish collection, because and a lot of that has a lot to do with their solid waste management system. If you ask me, if it is remotely or barely convenient for residents to be able to dispose of their solid waste in an appropriate way, they will find something else. That's just the reality of it. When I work in Indonesia, I have the same thing. So the strategy is not just about this thing doesn't work because people throw rubbish into it. The strategy is what is the system of waste management, water and solid waste that you need to introduce. So in Australia, most residents are understanding of what water-sensitive urban design is, and that is because they have experienced drought. And all water-sensitive features in, not all, the majority of them in Australia are now part of a stormwater harvesting scheme because they now understand the connection there. Not all of them are appreciative of river protection or river health protection. Some of them are, but those that are will also understand the role of water sensitive to the nice river that they happen to be walking next to. So for us, this whole social engagement is really just about information. You don't have to soak it up. You basically say what happens here finishes there, and allow people to understand that. Yeah.
Great. Any follow-up questions or any new questions to ask? Tony, if I can just ask you something, which last week I attended a talk, and there was a lecture given by Dr. Richard Houghton, which was the Lancet's editor-in-chief.
Yes.
So he was talking about sustainable medicine, but in the process, he started just like you in your lecture, painting a very grim world, you know, we're all failing in our goals, we're going to miss. And then suddenly he ends with something very interesting. He says that maybe we are approaching this climate change situation in the wrong way. They're all driven by climate scientists. They're all driven with data, with information. But yet, political decision and people who make the decision, they seem to be regressing rather than this. So he was basically suggesting maybe we should pay more attention to climate political science, not just climate science, and see how more understanding of the politics and the decision making could actually change the way these people are behaving, not just painting them doomsday scenarios, things cannot be done, we're all bad and all these things, which just spirally. I don't know, you have any comment on this?
I mean, I think he's completely right, but I have a different take, and this is just personal experience in this.
Okay.
Climate impact is before us, and nothing speaks louder than the cost of damage. Yeah. And so there is this currency whereby government are now wanting to look for solution. The real danger is that you rush through solutions with a whole bunch of unintended outcomes, because there's now a lot of money being thrown at this, and the funders are tripping over themselves trying to push the money out of the door, and many of them are still based on very conventional thinking, right? So my greatest fear, on the one hand, the positive is, and that's why I bring this up, the positive is that government are now listening to look for climate adaptation solutions. We need to have the principle that all our climate adaptation solutions need to inherently have climate mitigation outcomes. We need to do that in. But why are government now basically getting agitated with climate adaptation? Because it's costing them money. The type of flood damage and the drought damage and the compensation and the financial support that needs to go through. Which is why I'm here to actually have this call of action that the water sector particularly really need to step up in terms of their leadership and not sit back. You know, if you sit back, I can tell you now that conventional approaches to developing climate adaptation solutions will win the day. Yeah. So that's where the innovation is. The other is about climate and health. That is, you know, I brought up the three elements that have escalated to presidential level in COP28 was water, health, and food. Yeah, and that's it. So in some sense, the world is listening. Leadership, they are listening at the moment, but my greatest concern is that leadership are listening and looking for the quick fix, things that could be done within their term of government.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to now really encourage a greater level of system thinking, interconnections thinking, the connection of water with others, and how you can create what I often refer to as hybrid infrastructure that do all these multiple functions. So I agree that our advocacy really needs to actually give the podium greater to climate political scientists. But I, at the same time, am saying that there is no shortage of cry from communities or the private sectors for action, because it is now costing them money. So it is a window that we have to seize the day.
All right, thank you.
A lot of Indigenous communities in Canada don't have portable drinking water, and it's contaminated by a lot of the companies that come in, uranium, gold, and so on. So my question related to, given that the corporations that come into Canada for the purpose of extracting resources contaminate the water, what is the initiative or ability that the communities can put in place to try to be able to add like water management systems in, especially since the government of Canada has been failing over and over again for decades for implementation of water management to be able to give drinking water to communities that have been now on boiled water advisories for decades.
Yeah, look.
Thank you.
That is a really hard question, and one where I need to shrink back to become a humble academic and not be so bold to offer, because it is difficult. One, the whole recognition of indigenous right, I think, is emerging. That like in COP28, the indigenous voice was certainly a lot stronger. What is the lag time between that and really influencing, in the end, influencing policy? Government influencing government policy is the only way that you can actually start to look at good corporate behavior as far as their work is concerned. But I want to make the point that fundamentally, water is a basic right, and that there are generally available technology, albeit maybe overly expensive, to actually deliver and protect that water. Now, with the right policy setting, it drives corporation to actually think about business cases based on that policy setting. That would be my immediate reaction, which is not just exclusive to indigenous. It is to all communities that may be impacted by extraction industries mainly. But I actually don't have an answer for you. And anything I say, it will be a personal opinion that could cause all sorts of other implications that I'm not even aware of.
Right. So maybe it's time that I probably just bring this segment to a close. So the takeaway points, at least from my point of view, is really the principles of the practice, which I have highlighted, 3 of them. The cities as a water supply catchment. And I think this is particularly very important because I think that Singapore is beginning to relook at this part of it. We only capture about 10% of our rainfall, and we have lots more that we just discharge it. And out of 10% rainfall is our catchment. We lose a lot through evaporation, and this evaporation rate is getting higher and higher. So I think now basically there's a rethink on how can we capture more of those rainwater. And you pointed out the whole of Singapore is a catchment. It's not just a catchment within the catchment area. The second is cities providing ecosystem services. I think this nature-based solution is something that, yes, we've been talking about it, but I think that one of the good opportunities that we can actually see how this nature-based solution is integrated to the whole way that we do coastal protection. I think that is probably the key to how we move forward on this. And you illustrate this Long Island is something I feel that Long Island is that opportunity that we should not actually miss to integrate this one. And the third one is the cities comprising water-sensitive community. I think this is even bigger. Big has become more and more of importance now, as you need to bring in the coastal communities and the people and the businesses and the people who live there, all as you do the coastal protection, because at the end of it, it's going to impinge on them, their rights, their beaches that they used to enjoy, why you're putting something in front of them and so on. I think this engagement is taken out at different levels. As you pointed, you start at the government, you had to be at the industry, the people have the tools, and then finally the community themselves. I think this is something that I think as we move forward in our coastal protection, this is some part that we should pay more attention and not just bringing out technical or technology solution, even including nature-based solution, without being conscious of the thinking behind the community and so on. I thought that was important. And lastly, I thought you ended by saying that at the end, you need this digital technology to actually help us to do all this water management. And so that actually ties in with this afternoon. I told you I was attending the PUB work plan seminar, and the CEO was telling his plan. One of the things that he says is the future enabled PUB. Okay, in other words, looking forward, what does PUB should be doing? And one of the things was actually digital technologies and on how we can use AI and all this into managing our resources, managing our floods, managing control, and put it all into an integrated water urban system, not only just to look at the water supply, but the water, the flood, the mitigation, including also flood control. So this is an interesting analogy to see how we end up. And with that, let me just again get everybody to thank Dr. Tony Wong and Rachel for very welcome. Okay. I can come close to him now.
Thank you, Prof. Wong, for giving us your valuable time as well as sharing your amazing work. We would also like to thank Prof. Yong for his brilliant moderation for this Q&A session. I think we've all enjoyed the lecture and learned a lot. We are also pleased to inform you about our next lecture, which is incidentally in a week's time, again in this auditorium next Wednesday. It will be given by Mr. Charles Landry. So please do register for the same at the earliest. And please watch out for our social media channels and your emails, where we'll be informing you about all our future events. Hope you all have a great evening. Thank you.